Thank you very much. And that was very brief. And we are happy about that. All right. Okay, so on this note, we will be calling on our first speaker for the day. And he is in the person of Professor Samuel Bonsu, Director of GAMPA himself. Can we just appreciate him as he comes to the podium?
Thank you very much, madam. By the point that you made, it looks like I'll have to cut short my comments too, because you seem to appreciate the fact that Ordinary didn't take too much time. But I suppose it depends on the essence rather than the length. So forgive me if I go beyond the time that he had. Madam Chairperson, Public Services Commission, I think of you as number 5. So, members of council, GAMPA Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to stand on all protocols that have already been observed. I'm greatly honored today to have been given the opportunity to share some thoughts on the free SHS in Ghana and how we might mobilize the idea in a manner that enhances its value to Ghana. Let me play nostalgic a little bit and reflect on my own experiences as a secondary school student at the only college in Ghana, Prempeh College, in the 1970s and 80s. We paid school fees then, a token, some would say, as the government paid the bulk of our expenses. From what I hear of the current secondary school life, we had a very rosy existence, but we had pocket money that was given to us as part of our, from our school fees, and it was given to us during the midterm. Our laundry, our dirty laundry, was picked up and then returned to us on Monday afternoons at 1 p.m. So we didn't really have to wash our clothes. We had to suffer through, mere red, a lot of zomi, a lot of fish, a lot of, the good green things. And sometimes yokegeri with only 1 egg. How terrible. They only gave us 1 egg. Now, our predecessors or those who had gone before us would tell us that we didn't come in at a lucky time, because they were given 2 eggs and they had school uniforms given to them, but we had to pay for our uniforms and also got only just one egg with almost every meal, even if you had meat. Can you imagine? The groundnut soup that they were served was filled with real meat. I mean, real meat. And it was thick enough that you couldn't ever imagine using it as a mirror. These days, theirs was not like that. In fact, ours was not translucent, but it was definitely less endowed with the beef and mutton that they had. All of these, of course, was paid for by the government. Our meager fees that we paid would not have supported us for more than a week, even if they were all targeted and allocated to food only. Then there was the extracurricular activity that we didn't really have to pay for ever, because the government paid for all of them. Sometimes there were rumors that the government had not paid our subvention, and CHAS, the Conference of Heads of Assisted Secondary Schools, had decided that we may be forced to go home if they did not get some immediate response from the government. Now, for some, this potential closure created nightmares, because the conditions at school were far better than they were at home. That was the life at secondary school for me. At Prempeh College in the late 70s, early 80s, we had 7 years of properly manicured lawns. The lawns were beautiful, well kept, some place that we call the Appian Way, always clean. A set of students from diverse backgrounds, rich and poor together, ethnic diversity. We didn't even see that there were differences amongst us. Some of the differences, in fact, the most significant difference that we recognized was the level of intelligence that we had. So we would identify people as not being so smart and being excessively smart. And those were the clear distinctions that were visible to us. My experiences there would therefore influence my life immensely, growing up to appreciate ethnic, economic, social, and other diversities. I always imagined my male children attending Prempeh College so they would also enjoy the benefit of the brotherliness and camaraderie that I got, supported by a decent livelihood, funded mainly by government. As utopian as this wish may have sounded just about a decade ago, I can't stand still. I like to move when I speak, but it looks like the microphones won't work with me on that one, so I'll learn to stand still. Yeah, as utopian as this wish may have sounded just about a decade ago, it was the reality for many of us who attended school at the time that I was in secondary school. The government invested in us to create a very, very strong foundation for nation building. We were the foundational pillars. We were to grow into the various levels from the foundation to the first level, to the second level, to the third level. And look at us. Here we are today. Several of my mates are in good stations in life as leaders of this country. Somehow, we lost this free secondary school experience that was given to us somewhere along the line. I'm no historian, therefore I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the history of secondary school and how we lost the free dimension and all the perks that came along with it. I believe, however, that this was part of the basis for President Akufo-Addo's Free SHS initiative to offer education as a potential equalizer for all of us and to facilitate nation building through the provision of education to the marginalized and the vulnerable, those who would otherwise not be able to attend. Indeed, education has long been considered a major driver of socioeconomic development. Its power lies not in enriching the mind of the individual alone, but more so in the potential for the psychosocial change among all the people that education touches, and all the people in the social sphere of the individuals who are educated. Educating one person has the potential to impact the person's entire family and perhaps even the broader community. I believe that our founding president, Agyapong Kwame Nkrumah, understood this quite well, and it was probably part of his rationale for initiating the policy that would grant free secondary education to those who were from the north. Many of our current leaders benefited from this policy. Various other elements and policies have been designed and implemented towards the same goal, providing universal education both at the primary and secondary levels over the years. I dare to say that part of the reason for the failure, even though I claim not to be an historian, is that the liberalization of education in Ghana, allowing the private sector a more active involvement in the education of us as Ghanaians, fueled in part by the structural adjustment programs that were championed by the Bretton Woods institutions, contributed to the government's abandonment of education funding. That is, sometime in the 80s, there was pressure on our budget. We went to the World Bank, the IMF, and we were encouraged to discourage investments in education as a way of cutting costs. And we bought into that offer. It is interesting to observe that while we were being encouraged to dismantle our free education in Ghana, The proponents of those ideas back in their own countries were entrenching free education in their countries. They were committing themselves even more to free education at the pre-university level. But some of them even extended beyond pre-university to include universities. So really, we had a situation where somebody was telling you to reduce your investment in education, and they were tripling or doubling their investment, not just in primary or secondary education, but in their entire education system. But I digress. I may be moving into the tyranny of development. And I have talked about this before in the past, and I don't want to go there. Today is a different day. But that situation occasioned deterioration in our education system and a movement towards elitism in education. This has remained a major affront to social equity in the country. If you didn't have money, you couldn't go to school. You only went to school as far as you could afford, and many of us would not have been able to afford education probably beyond the primary level. And still, we survived. Really, aside education, how else might one seek to neutralize the powers of education in our families and society? How do we take advantage of the resources, the opportunities available to us in our country and elsewhere if we do not understand what those things are? If we don't even see what the opportunities are? Education is what opens our eyes to be able to see some of these things and then take advantage of them as necessary. The situation that we found ourselves in the mid-90s after the liberalization of education challenged the current, it wasn't in place then, but challenged the current UN's 2030 agenda, where member countries committed to providing free secondary education for their citizens by the year 2020. It was mainly the rich who could take advantage of educational opportunities in their countries. And therefore, the poor had to give up a lot of their hope. Secondary schools were charging a lot of fees. If you didn't have money, you were lucky to just finish primary school and stay there. All those who were not rich, sometimes a few would manage and they would struggle. But they were made poorer just by their attempt to keep their children in school. And really, this is not unusual in many developing countries. Ghana's situation was not very different from many others because the statistics suggest that about 80% of eligible skilled children across 65 countries are not able to access secondary education. And these are people who have signed up and committed to providing free access to secondary school for their citizens. They are not able to do that. 80% of 65 countries, of children in 65 countries around the world are not able to do that. And perhaps we can imagine a situation where families had to choose who among their children would be sent to school. It was a major commitment. And if you had to send one child to school, the others may have to stay home because there were no resources to support the others. One can conclude then that the heart of the President Akufo-Addo was in the right place when he considered free SHS in 2012 in his campaign for presidency at the time, and also in the later implementation of the policy in 2017. As I said, Ghana remains one of the few countries in the developing world that has actually made the bold move to a comprehensive offer of free SHS for all. Ghana's free SHS, as in its current state, provides a foundation, or perhaps I should say is intended to provide a foundation for fundamental socioeconomic development. Article 25(1)(b) of the 1992 Constitution states, and I quote, Secondary education in its different forms, including technical and vocational education, shall be made generally available and accessible to all by every appropriate means. I repeat, every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive introduction of free education. In Ghana, therefore, secondary education is a constitutional right. It is not to be a privilege, it is a right. The two major political parties agree on this, that free secondary education is a right, or perhaps then not the free part, but secondary education is a right. And if we're supposed to make it, if it is a right, then whether or not you have money, you should be able to go. The NDC, for instance, believes in progressive introduction of free secondary education under the Constitution as I just read it. In September 2015, under the NDC government, a version of free SHS was created. It was a form of partial funding for the reduction of the cost of senior high school to some students. Specifically, students were exempt from paying exam fees, entertainment fees, library fees, student representative council dues, sports fees, culture fees, science, development and mathematics fees, ICT fees, and co-curricular fees for day students in public senior high schools. This was a policy to slowly integrate free SHS into our system without disruption. So that it was going to take quite a bit of time. The delivery was to be accomplished in part through the 200 e-schools that were to be built in several communities. These schools will be day schools under the program. It is clear that the building designs were the same if you've taken a look at all of them, regardless of where the school was built. There are one or two exceptions, but generally it is the same design. These schools got attention and are being used today to supplement the educational facilities in some areas. The attempt would save quite a bit of money. The problem, though, was that we had to reorient our minds. And I don't know if I could call that a problem. But we were fixated to a high degree on the boarding school system. And I made reference to my own experiences at Prempeh College when we had people coming in from all parts of the country. And obviously, we couldn't have had a day school for them because they couldn't have come from Accra on a daily basis. They couldn't have come from Oko on a daily basis. So the boarding school system, which we have, through successive governments, entrenched into our systems and into our minds to appreciate as the ultimate of educational values or educational quality, was not going to be let go just like that. Besides, these schools had not been tested. These new schools had not been tested. They had no basis for arguing that they were going to function properly. They're going to yield the results that parents wanted. 7 A's, 8 A's, 9 A's. So many still preferred the Prempeh colleges of their country, who had proven their mettle over a period of time. So that if wherever I lived, I'd prefer to go to a secondary school that was more likely to help me achieve my educational goals. So there were challenges to the progressive approach of introducing day schools in the education system of Ghana. Now, contrary to the progressive approach of the previous government, His Excellency the President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, believed that children had waited too long and should be given free access to secondary education now, immediately. For him, and all the people who worked with him on this project of free SHS included free tuition immediately. Admission fee were not to be paid. Free textbooks, library fees were exempt. Science center fees were exempt. ICT fees were exempt. Examination fees were exempt. Utility fees were not paid. And boarding school fees were paid. Meals were provided. His free SHS policy absorbs all direct costs of schooling and other indirect costs throughout upper secondary school institutions in the country. Children from poorer communities could also attend the prestigious schools across the country that were not located in their immediate communities. This meant that the boarding school model would be preserved. It wasn't going to go anywhere for a while. We all know that since the SHS was, the free SHS was implemented, policy was implemented, there have been several challenges, and I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm only going to look at a few of those challenges and perhaps connect them to opportunities for addressing them and entrenching the free SHS into our educational system. So we all know that the popularity of the SHS was quite swift. It was introduced and implemented in September. And as Asante and Agwe put it a year or so ago, the resulting high enrollment rates culminated in teacher shortages, increased workload for existing teachers, classroom deficits, overcrowding in classrooms, high rate of indiscipline and inadequate teaching learning materials. Nobody was, some of the students were having challenges, especially with supervision. There were also delays in the supply of funds and other materials, and this exacerbated the predicament, shedding the efficiency of, well, perhaps not shedding, but mitigating, shredding, reducing the efficiency of the policy in many of the schools. There is free lodging, free feeding that has always been in our system, our education system at the secondary school level. So the explicated intricacies and deep-seated nuances in these results, which is the negative aspects of it, leads us to start thinking about how we might do things a little better. There was also talk about the uneven magnitude of schools' challenges. Some were wealthy enough by themselves that they would be able to support whatever the government was providing for them. Some were so poor that even with the support that was given to them, there were even bigger challenges. These challenges came with a host of other issues, including sometimes angry contractors for school supplies, school suppliers who complained about borrowing money to fund their supplies for the schools and not being paid on time. It seemed that the only clear success story here was the cost absorption of fees for the students. Now, the fee absorption was a big thing by itself. But as we all know, it wasn't enough to compensate for the other parts of the problem. Free SHS, obviously, has a lot of challenges. But is that enough to tell us or to encourage us to dispense of it? I would argue not. The project rests on 5 pillars according to the Ministry of Education. One is to remove the cost of barriers, and I believe that that has been achieved in very significant measure, because now a child not going to secondary school who is eligible to attend would have done it by choice, not for lack of resources. The second part, the second pillar, was the expansion of infrastructure. In 2017, when the program was implemented, there was a bit of a challenge there. There wasn't enough facilities to absorb the numbers that were going back to school. Some improvements have occurred over the years, but I'll return to this in a moment about how we might be able to deal with some of those. The other part of it was improvement in quality and equity of access. We've gained, some would argue, in the equity, because everybody can go to school. But some people question the quality. So while we have gained in equity, we may not have gained what was the best for us, or what could have been when it comes to the quality of education that we provide at the secondary level. Some schools have also been described as elite. And part of the basis for the free SHS, as it's being implemented now, was to preserve certain spaces. 30% of elite schools placements were to be reserved for people coming from public JSS, what we would call in our time Saito. Some of us, we went to Saito, but thank God we could still write our names. Today, a lot of kids coming out of Saito cannot write their own names. If you have a long name, it may take you forever to be able to write it. Then the last pillar on which the SHS stood was to prepare students for work, equip them with the skills that were needed for them to be able to work upon graduation. Now, as I've indicated, there have been many, many challenges that have been cited regarding the SHS. The most prominent ones, in fact, featured in the early days: lack of adequate facilities, the placement system, what do we call it, the tracks, the double tracks, and all that. But if we agree that education is the surest way to improving the country's lot, building the foundation and securing a future for our country, defending the country against any kind of attack. These days, when we think attack, we think of military. But there can be attacks through educational inefficiencies, poor quality of training. Education is if we think that education is the surest way of protecting ourselves against such an attack, then it appears that the free SHS is one of the best things that could have happened to us. I'd like to think that the free SHS, I keep getting it wrong. Free secondary school, that's better. It appears that we should allow the free secondary school education support that we provide to continue and be polished up. Continue to be free, continue to be accessible, continue to be available to anyone who needs to attend secondary school. What I think we need to consider is how we can address the challenges that we have identified in the policies implementation over the past 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I am no expert. I learn a lot from people every day, and I've heard a lot from people, and I'm still hearing and learning a lot from people. But I have a few thoughts on how we might address some of these challenges. Number one, inadequate infrastructure. We have had major challenges with school infrastructure, having fewer schools than we need to absorb the numbers that came in. I remember one legislature talking before any SHS was introduced, talking about trees under schools in Parliament some years back. So obviously we've had challenges with our school system if we have to put them under trees or schools under trees. The situation was aggravated by the free SHS system because the numbers that came in were far beyond what had been imagined or what had been planned. Consider, for instance, that in 2015, about 415,000 students were placed, but 115,000 of them did not enroll. We don't know why. Of course, I didn't check to see why. This was in 2015. In 2016, about the same number of students were placed, but it was only 111 that did not enroll at all. Then, in 2017, the policy was introduced. About 425,000 students were placed, only 62,000 did not enroll. Right there, if you look at the 2 years ahead, you are looking at no less than 60,000 students, additional students, who had enrolled. And mainly, I would argue, because of the free SHS. They could now afford to go to school. The trend was repeated in 2018. About 487,000 students and 53,000 did not enroll. In 2019, 460,000, 55,000 did not enroll. I could go on and on and on and on. According to the Ministry of Education, Student enrollment at the SHS level has increased from 881,600 in 2006 to about 1.2 million in 2021. Almost 300,000 new students that we now have to take care of. Clearly, there is a significant increase in enrollment. The country was not ready for this sudden increase. This is what, in part, led to the double track. Could it have been that students who would otherwise attend private secondary schools were now enrolling in the public ones because they no longer had to pay school fees? This would suggest then, if this were true, or if this were the case, it would suggest that the private school owners would have plenty of space available. The children would have left the private schools empty. So instead of the government perhaps rushing to build new schools under the stress that it endured over that period, there could have been an alternative. And that alternative would have been going into agreements with the private school owners who had space, leasing these spaces as an immediate measure to absorb the problem or address the problem, ease the accommodation burden that arose. Many of these private schools went belly up. They went out of business. So it could have been a win-win situation where they would have kept their premises and earned a little bit of income from it, and the government would not have put itself under a lot of stress in trying to meet the needs of the students who all had to get into school. The government had to then introduce the various measures, the double track, the color-coded systems that were introduced. Even today, I think part of that problem persists, even though there have been several schools, over 100 of new schools have been built. Though the older ones, some of the older ones have also been refurbished. But the problem persists. And I believe that the government might well look into working together with the private sector. Consider the spaces that are currently available free as a quick solution to addressing the need for new spaces to accommodate the ever-increasing number of students that are entering our secondary schools. At the very worst, this could be a very quick fix and allow us to buy time to seek more permanent solutions to the problem. A second common problem that we hear about, and many, especially in the era of budget challenges that our country faces, is one that relates to financial burden of the SHS. It is expensive. And somebody said that if you think education is expensive, well, try ignorance. Ignorance is far more expensive than education. So truly, yes, free SHS is expensive, and it will forever be expensive because this is an economist's perspective. There is no free lunch. Milton Friedman, a very liberal economist. There is no free lunch. Somebody has to pay for it. And if we see education as the necessary foundation for growth and development, then it is an investment that is worth it. It is worth all the 7.7 billion that the program has taken in since inception. And this is where the Minister of Finance about a year ago. Indeed, some are suggesting the need to scrap the free SHS, and then we won't need the e-levy, because the e-levy is estimated to generate about 6.9 billion. And if we have spent 7.7 billion, maybe if we didn't have free SHS, we may not need the e-levy. Now, I think this is a very simplistic argument. Yeah? I would rather separate the e-levy argument to one side and look at the secondary school SHS issue on another side. Arguments around the e-levy clearly should be separated from the free SHS. Really, any proper investment into education, I believe, is money well spent. I am testament to that. SHS, not in the form that it is, but in a different form. But I enjoyed it, and I believe that it has made a significant impact. It's been a tremendous impact in my life. Education is a major tool for defending Ghana's future. The youth of today need education, and we are doing so through the free SHS, developing what I would consider a literate citizenry. A literate citizenry is a good foundation for any level of growth. We cannot grow without literacy. Our growth will be severely stunted if we are not educated. And education at the foundational level, which is at the primary level, at the secondary level, to me, is probably more important than university education. I always talk about the fact that my father dropped out of school when he was 13. This was in 1933. But my children and I joke about the type of vocabulary that my father had when he spoke English, when he wrote English. And to this day, my children and I would joke. You know, sometimes we will say, oh, Yemboro Grandpa Bro for Kakra. Right? And then I look at some of the letters that he wrote, and I compare them with the essays and papers that we receive from some of our postgraduate students. And you can see the value of even basic education if it is properly administered and rolled out. I am not one who advocates for a scholarship scheme in response to those who think that we are spending too much money. I know of the Cocoa Board scholarships, or at least I knew of them. I was a recipient. Yes, my parents had a cocoa farm, and so I deserved it. But I also knew others who had never seen a cocoa pod before. The closest they had come to cocoa was chocolate, after it was imported from Switzerland or Belgium. But they were the ones with the scholarships. Until we develop a mechanism by which we are going to be able to apportion or deliver these scholarships to the needy, I wouldn't recommend that. What we need is a sustainable plan, a long-term sustainability plan for the free SHS, because I think it has to stay. I've lived in a number of countries around the world, and many of them have free secondary education. In fact, those countries that I referred to earlier who were encouraging us to dismantle our free SHS system, some of them even have free universities. So you can go to school from kindergarten all the way to a PhD and pay absolutely nothing. Why don't we deserve that? Why do we deserve any less? Are we less intelligent? Are we less human? I would argue no. With effective and efficient management of our resources, that is precisely what we deserve. Investment into our education for national development. Some have also recommended making the rich pay and granting free access to the poor. I'm not exactly sure how we measure poverty in this country. The information that we have has often been derived from World Bank data. The World Bank tells us what and who is poor and by what measures. We ourselves, sometimes we know somebody who looks poor may not always be poor, but because we lack measures of poverty for our own economic system, we rely on what our eyes tell us, what we see. We may have to change that. There are lots and lots and lots of poor people who are disguised as rich people. You know, they come across as very wealthy, but they are suffering, and their children are the ones sometimes who suffer. The approach we lack here, therefore, in terms of determining measures of poverty is a problem. We need an approach. There are many who are off the formal grade. And there are some who are in the informal sector who look poor and are very wealthy. I've met a few of them. Perhaps the government can engage the statistical services to come up with something, metrics for determining need. When a reasonable formula is set, then we might consider this approach of determining need as a basis for offering scholarships on the basis of need and intellectual capabilities or capacities. In the meantime, I believe that much like we have done for the National Cathedral, perhaps we can set up a fund for the free SHS and invite voluntary contributions. That may come as a surprise to many because Ghanaians are not known for their wonderful philanthropy. But we are very philanthropic. We don't give the same way that we may see in other places, somebody picking up $1 million and handing it over to an institution. But several of us take care of younger siblings, of orphans that we meet, people we pick up on the streets. We take care of them. Now, we do not document these forms of philanthropy. In our hearts, in our souls, we are a very giving people. And when we are encouraged, I believe that we will do that. So the government might consider a heritage fund, like the Norwegian type, that is locked in. It's an endowment of sorts for free SHS, and then invite funds from the government. A portion of government proceeds will be invested in it. Individuals might be invested to make contributions, entities, the third sector, even foreign governments who are interested in supporting us. Why not? They might be able to invest. Really, I think that Ghanaians are very, very philanthropic, even though we may not be deemed philanthropic by way of Western standards. If we had something like this, we might surprise ourselves. We may do some things that we don't even think we could do. Really, I was happy to hear the finance minister last week talk about some cost-cutting measures. In a village that I visited sometime not too long ago in the western region, as I stood there, watched the kids and the school, there were a few thoughts that came to my mind. And one of them, these are thoughts running through my head. One of them was, I imagine if we could sell 3 SUVs, the transformation that we could bring to the school. So the finance minister is talking about cost cutting. Maybe by reason of I think he suggested something along the lines of no longer purchasing vehicles, imported vehicles, perhaps a savings. If we were to look at that, if we were to encourage our 260 plus districts to each reduce its budget by 3 SUVs and invest it into 1 secondary school at a time, we may not be talking about difficulties in funding. We may have enough to fund. Indeed, I believe that we have enough to fund the SHS. Free SHS. I should emphasize the free SHS. Another area of arguments, of criticism against the free SHS is that it guarantees access, no doubt, but it overemphasizes quality at the expense, overemphasizes quantity at the expense of quality. That is, yes, you are given access, but the facilities are such that you get out and know nothing, because the resources that are provided to sustain your ability to learn anything in school is significantly diminished. Part of this argument is grounded, for instance, in the double track system and associated issues, And those associated issues I talk about, and these are what other people have talked about. I look at teenage pregnancy, for instance. That is an unlikely outcome of free SHS. And its connection to the double track, because the argument is that kids come home and they have to spend 6 months at home. And obviously, the devil always finds work for the idle hands. This kind of work gets you pregnant. Some of us are still growing, so maybe we'll learn about some of these things. But part of the associated problems are also delays in supplies needed for the school. So that you are there for 12 weeks or so, sometimes the 12 weeks are over and you still haven't received your supply. But you are supposed to have made progress in your learning. So we are giving access, we are giving education, but what kind of education are we giving? Where is the quality? The government has noted that this argument is untenable. The Minister of Education, I heard him argue somewhere that the last set of students before this one, the first crop of students who were the SHS babies, I call them, had results that were on average better than what we had had before. So the argument then is that the quality was better, or at least comparable, at the very least, comparable to what we had had before. I have noted the possibility earlier of engaging the private sector to address the accommodation problem. So I'll not belabor that point. But I think that there is something that we have to pay attention to once again in looking at a variety of things. I refer to the previous government's attempts to build a free SHS concept or develop a free SHS concept. The government started the e-schools with the goal of providing community spaces for secondary school students. The challenge is that these new schools were built in communities that tended to serve a very small number of people. The cluster concept that was to form the basis for the e-schools was not effectively or efficiently implemented. Because if you had a school at a particular point and it was to serve a number of communities, they had to find a way to come to the school. Now, if it is about poverty, you are unlikely to have somebody paying all the time to drive, or well, catch a bus to the school, or trotro, or pragia, or those things. It's expensive, right? So the cluster system did not work quite well. If the idea was future-oriented, and I don't know this, I'm just speculating about what the government of the time was thinking. If the idea was future-oriented, anticipating growth in the broader community, then this is an admirable thought. It's an admirable thought. However, these schools need to be working on engaging a broader community well beyond its immediate geographical location. The government can take advantage of that. Now, these schools are already built. They belong to Ghana. The government should take advantage of those schools, investing in some of those schools to improve their quality. I know that we all know the big brands. You know, for example, the only college in this country. And many of us want our children to go to those schools. So it doesn't matter which school you build and where you build it. We're only thinking those big schools. Maybe, if we invest enough in these new schools that have been built, in these e-schools, in these other schools that we are considering, we might be able to develop a very good brand that will also become attractive. We invest enough to build quality as a basis for these schools, because that is how these older schools have achieved their brands and the names they carry. We can consider what I would think of as a similar branding strategy over the short period of time. And it's happened before. I've seen it happen. You know, when I see the list of top performing schools on the on Wasi. Sometimes I wonder, because there are schools that I'd never heard before. Some of them are as young as 5, 10 years old. Some of them are as old as some old people. So you can be a very good school and young, and you can be a terrible school and old. It is how much you look to, or how much you invest in it. And I'm encouraging us to invest a lot more in these schools, take advantage of them, and see how much they can be improved, how the quality base can be formed. See, because I see us as a country, I hear the Minister of Education talking one time about STEM and the special schools that are being developed and the investment that is going in there. We could even look at experimental schools, the Agyapong time, the experimental schools. And for every district, if we could adopt one school, invest whatever is necessary to be invested in that school and make it the best that it can be, one district at a time. That, I believe, is possible. We provide these schools with all the resources they might need. They could be a day school, it could be a boarding school, but they would have the resources, you see. And I believe that once a school starts performing, parents, guardians are going to be very interested in sending their children there. We have found all kinds of ways. Look at how we have older students coming up from all parts of the country, and they figure out ways when they're not given residence on campus. They find ways to survive. I believe that the government will not be alone in its effort to improve the schools. Like-minded individuals will also join to help, sharing their thoughts to ensure that the free SHS is further entrenched and becomes a significant part of the fabric of this country. These are just a few thoughts. I've only identified 3 core areas of interest. There are others, but obviously time will not allow us to touch on all of those issues. I wish to commend His Excellency the President for the boldness that he took to implement the free free SHS. I have to say it slowly. Free SHS policy. Boldly, aggressively, and then showing us that it can be done. In spite of its challenges, yes, it may not be perfect. And that is to be expected, I believe, of any grand policy. It doesn't come out shining like a star. It comes out with certain parts of it shining, and then we polish the other sides to make it shine all around. We should be willing to learn from these lessons of the past 5 years and continue to move the project forward. We should accept the fact that the SHS is a good thing for us as a nation. The foundation on which our future sits should be strong enough, and education is the primary means by which that strength can be developed and maintained. I believe that it is time for the government, perhaps, to call for critical review of the implementation of the policy. I don't think there is anyone in this country who doubts the value of the SHS. Everybody recognizes it as something that we need, an idea which time has come. But we should always also be willing to look behind and see what we have left. What are the casualties? Is it possible to resuscitate them and bring them back to life? And that is a necessary part of any policy implementation effort. So we need to be doing this, reviewing as a means to identifying the challenges and seeking solutions to the program, the challenges that the program has faced. As an institute that was set up to support government policy and action, and that is what GIMPA is, we are happy to take the initiative in bringing experts together to conduct a post-mortem of the policy. Now, my choice of phrase here, post-mortem, would lead some to think that I'm suggesting the death of the SHS program. As I have indicated repeatedly, I do not see the death of free SHS. My dream, even as an individual, my dream is for the SHS to stay and be entrenched so deeply that it becomes synonymous with citizenship, that you don't even have to think about it anymore. It becomes a major fabric. It's integrated into the fabric of our nation. It is a great idea that I believe has to stay. What we need is to improve its cost efficiency and to improve the quality of education that it provides. How this is to be done is debatable, I'm sure. And sometimes pamno chano ni nyane machino. Right? So somebody may pamno, somebody may chano, but yechina, it balances out. Yeah. So the emphasis should be on hearing the voices, even the dissenting voices. Sometimes there is wisdom in dissent. And through discussions, through debate, and as I offered, GIMPA's willingness to support policy development and implementation in this area, we can have a clear formula for sustaining this great idea that the President, in his wisdom, working with his team, has encouraged us to pursue. I hope that it stays with us for generations to come. I have always talked about the tyranny of development that we have had to endure over the years, from our colonial times to our present. I think we should start taking charge of our own destiny. Building a strong foundation with education is a major avenue for achieving this. The free SHS has led us into thinking that we can free ourselves from this tyranny. And I believe that we are ready. Our emancipation from the tyranny of development depends on us. Education is the way to do it. And the government's free education policy, I believe, has allowed us to recognize the possibility and the value of free SHS in this country and beyond. As I said, GIMPA was born for this joy, and we are always ready to help. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to further discussion on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Samuel Bonsu, Rector of GIMPA. Thank you so very much for those wonderful thoughts you've shared with us. Okay. On this note, whilst he was speaking, we had the honorable presence of Reverend Intim Fojo, the Deputy Minister himself for Education. Can we appreciate him with a round of applause? He walked in whilst Prof was speaking. Thank you so much. All right, on this note, you know, there's some interest, when you look into the Bible, since I'm a Reverend Minister, I'd like to just make a statement. You look into the Bible, and the Bible says that Jesus was sent to the earth. Because God believes in education, he sent the word and not the spirit first. So education is the key, and we do embrace that truth. All right. on that note, we want to welcome an artist who is here to do some interesting painting, a live painting for us. And he's in the person of Derek. Can we have Mr. Derek on stage? And whilst waiting for him, we want the evergreen choir, the Gimpa, harmonious, beautiful choir with your smiles. You lighten up the place, okay? So you'll be giving us some beautiful secular music whilst the painting is going on until it's done. A moment, and I want to announce to you that Net2 TV Ghana is streaming this program live, and also Oman FM is telecasting this live. Thank you very much. painter is done, and wow, what a talent, what a gift. Amazing. How are you able to do that? The podium. All of them, I think, are melodious voices. You are really evergreen. You have kept the atmosphere for us, and we celebrate you for that. Okay, so the painter did paint the president himself. And this is it's so amazing how he did that upside down. And thank you very much. But you know, most times when there's a painting like that, we can't just let it go. So anybody who is interested in buying this for the president, you can see Mr. Kwesi Boche. Mr. Kwesi Boche, can you lift your hands? And you buy it as a gift. They put your name on it, and they go and give it to the president. That you bought it for him. Okay, thank you very much. Interesting. Make sure you write your name and put your phone number. Okay, So back to our program. All right, so we will be receiving our second speaker, who is in the person of the Deputy Education Minister himself, whose name is Honorable Reverend Intim Fojo. Can we receive him with a clap offering as he comes to deliver his speech? Okay.
Thank you very much, Reverend, for the kind introduction. My friend is really talented, being able to do this upside down. Such a great talent. Many of us, like myself, even when it is up straight, it will be very difficult to even draw the ear. So such a beautiful art of work deserves another round of applause. And I was just going to request that we can begin the auction of this art immediately. Then I remember that my pay has been cut by 30%, so I have to be cautious. So it's exciting to be here. It's a very wonderful afternoon, and I must apologize for coming here late, as most of you have followed the events of the day. It is a day where every member of parliament had to find their way to parliament. Right from the morning till the time I left off to come here, we had to debate e-levy and take final decision on it. And so I would have loved to be here even before the start of the event, but I had to play that duty before coming. So pardon me that I wasn't here for the most part of the program. Professor Samuel Kokubonsu, Rector of GIMPA, Professor Martin Morgan Tuli, Deputy Rector, GIMPA, Dr. Janet Ampedufo-Fie, Head of Public Service Commission, Mr. Tony Marshall, Institute for Transgenerational Leaders, Mr. Norman Tete, GIMPA Alumni President, Deans and Directors of GIMPA, Ms. Jenny Adade, Madame Gloria Owusu, CEO of Glotex, Mr. Odeneho Opon, and Mr. Kwesiboche, Jr., organizers of this event for the Institute of Transgenerational Leaders, great students of this noble institution, invited guests and colleague guest speakers who have earlier on most eloquently delivered their speeches. Indeed, it is such a delight to be here to share ideas and thoughts on consolidating the gains of free senior high school policy, protecting the legacy for future generations. I must at the outset say that I associate myself with a lot of the brilliant suggestions that have come from our earlier speakers, even in ensuring that we have a policy that is ever increasing in efficiency and effectiveness, and a policy that is ever reviewing to ensure that Ghana gets the best of this policy and the investment that we are making into the future of our children and grandchildren and generations to come are safeguarded. Every suggestion that have come forth are based on well-meaning thoughts and coming from very genuine hearts. And I must assure you that all these have been well listened to and noted. Of course, further discussions on this will have to continue. But I must acknowledge that many governments and previous governments have done their part in laying a solid foundation for us in this country on education. And at this point, to convey to you the warm compliments of the Minister for Education, Dr. Yao Ose Educhum, whose heart beats is the vision of the President in transforming our education, going on our agenda of prioritizing education and making sure that every Ghanaian child receives access to quality education, regardless of the home they are coming from, whether they are rich or poor. The government poised to ensure that every child is given equal and equitable access to realize their dreams. From colonial times to President Dr. Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, through many regimes, all through 1987 education reforms, to President Agyapong Kufuor, President Mills, President Mahama, and President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, whose birthday it is today, and we honor him. All have paid their dues, all have contributed, all will have something to be remembered for the various contributions that they made to the education of this country. So at the outset, I want us to have this conversation from that premise that it is a non-political discussion. It is a nationalistic discussion, a discussion for the country, a discussion for our young ones with no political sentiment whatsoever. That is the basis on which I proceed. But I must begin with a quote from Malcolm X, and he said that education is a passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. End of quote. And if I must add, the future belongs to those who invest in it today. Education is quite an investment, and it's an investment that pays off. And that is the reason why the countries that are listed as whatever countries, or countries that are advanced, countries that everybody desires to go to, countries that everybody desires to visit, either for a tour, either for a research, either for academic pursuit, either to pursue a career. Countries that industries are rushing to set up their factories. You can talk of the Vietnams, whose narrative some years past may not have been too different from Ghana, but today recognized as a country that is producing 100,000 engineers every year. You talk of Australia, you talk of Japan, you talk of South Korea, you talk of Australia, and many such countries whose narratives are modeled and referenced. Finland, Norway. These are countries that invested heavily many, many decades ago, some even dating back a centuries ago, who identified that there is a direct link between poverty and education. And it's a chicken and egg situation. That for you to be able to eradicate poverty, the best strategy is to invest into education. And those who adopted education as a strategy for rapid socio-economic development, prioritized investment of same, today have the critical mass of their population with the critical minds and skills that have transformed their economies and keep transforming. So you would say that when you set those countries aside and compare them to third world countries and compare them to low-income countries, the gap is so wide, and there's a need to catch up. But whilst we are attempting to catch up, they are also advancing. A couple of years ago, a cabinet committee was set together in Vietnam, and they came with one strong recommendation that even the investment they put into the education and all the strategies that and the gains they've made in STEM education, if they do not up their game, they will be unable to meet the target of their socio-economic development. Even Vietnam, for all that they've done. So they want to catch up. So there are countries today that by the time that a child completes pre-tertiary education, they are able to have patents in their names. There are countries that are at the moment thinking of constructing buildings with bricks that in itself will generate electricity for them without requiring cables. The countries today whose students are busy with research that are providing solutions for some of the most complex challenges we face: environmental, climate change, transportation, health, and many other sectors. And this is coming about because of investment into their education. These are countries that are long embraced that every child must be given the opportunity. And for you to have poverty done away with, for you to eradicate poverty, you must invest in empowering the individual, empowering families Because when one is educated and is clothed with employable skills and is innovative, they would themselves be able to create jobs. And when they even gain jobs, if they are not entrepreneurial at the outset, they will be most productive to ensure that overall the GDP of those countries also sees some positive impact. And that has been the understanding. The narrative in Ghana, having acknowledged the many contributions of the past leaders over the years, we would all acknowledge that many people were still left out regardless, nonetheless. Many people, and when you go critically to study data, you're pointed to the fact that those that are left out, a chunk of them come from poor homes, poor communities, like where I come from. Meanwhile, there are talents, and just as Dr. Erichum always makes the illustration that we have two types of ponds. We have the pond of the rich and the pond of the poor, and each have talents. But because of issues of accessibility and issues of economic factors and wherewithal, we always have the rich people realizing their dreams and getting opportunity to school and to the best of the schools available, whereas the poor wallow in poverty with no one to support them. I completed JHS as a 14-year-old in Asinkruwa. And at the time that I completed school, together with my colleagues, cousins, and friends, we didn't even have access to electricity. We had no access to telecommunication. If you don't have electricity, you can't even have network to make calls. We didn't have potable drinking water. And the structure that we completed school in didn't have windows that were fixed. Well, the blocks, there were blocks, but they were not even plastered, even to talk of having fittings. And not forget to mention that I started in New Apostolic Church, nursery or KG as far back as I can remember, and we were graduated to a tree, school on a tree. And we relished the fresh air that we breathed under the tree. It was very close to my house. I could always just go and drink water and come back to school. Then we were put in that block, and I completed that school. But there were teachers that were generous enough to accept posting to that village. Now, the closest school to that village would be some 50 kilometers away. And so a free SHS at the time was even there, and as some will contend that borders don't need to be funded, don't need to be catered to have education, and that it must be day for, we must fund it just like the United Kingdom does for only day students. It's working for a certain country because of their structure. But there are many Asinkruwas today. There are many such in Team Forgers today, whose villages still bear the resemblance of what I went through so many years ago. So I finished school having set record in my JHS. But even to be able to afford to go to SHS was a big challenge. There are many struggles we had to go through. My father on one of the trips came back and almost changed his mind, and for me to follow the norm. And without any derogatory intent to go to the farm or to learn trade, I could have been successful. But myself and my friends, even whenever we went to the cocoa farms, whenever we went to the plantain farms and our citrus farms, and we're weeding and we're watering our vegetable farms, we conversed among ourselves. We had dreams. Some wanted to become a great economist. We had dreams to get back to farming, but not with the machetes and the hoes. We had dreams to go back and do our great better than our parents were doing and our grandparents were doing. And so today, if I meet a rich, blessed, privileged man, and without any derogatory intent, who says that, yes, my grandchild, I can afford his fees, I can take him to school, And the government doesn't need to pay for me if I'm taking my grandchild to school. I wish my grandfather could have said same for me. Not even my father. Just 3 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a former district chief executive of my village, my district. And while we're having a conversation, I remember there was a time I was little. I paid a visit with my dad to her office. I didn't know what the conversation was about. So many years after, I went back to the village, we're having a conversation. Oh, I remember my dad and myself, we came to your office. And she says, yes, your dad came to borrow some money that he could pay your fees. And that was the purpose of the trip. And it was something I never knew. All the struggles that my family had to go through, it had to become a communal contribution. My older siblings and cousins and family and everybody having to contribute. I am not the only person who has this story. The Minister for Education has even a more touching story than this. So fast forward, even though I desired to go to some other schools, I had to go to a school I did not choose. But it has become a school that is my best school, St. Mansu SHS. I got there, and I was given the opportunity to do science. All through my stay, it was just a miracle that I was able to complete. Because there were many times I was sad from dining because I owed school fees. I could not pay and had to struggle. And coming from the very hard background where your chop box is definitely not a friend to turn to, and to be sad sometimes 2 weeks, how would you even have a conducive mindset to study? And my colleagues, some of them could not afford boarding, so they were day students, and it was even tougher for them. Having come from various villages within the catchment, having to find themselves a hostel, and struggling to get by, even find a hot meal a day. When the boarders would go for dining and come back, you find them seated. And from the look of their faces, you could tell this is not what they chose. But they had to go through. But by the time we're in third year, many could not survive. They had to drop out, not because they were not brilliant enough or intelligent enough, but they had to drop off because there was not support coming to push them through. There were 6 siblings of mine. Only 2 of us could have that meaningful education. And the rest are even proven more intelligent than those of us that had access. So many families then and now, with their situation, if not for free SHS, will have to do opportunity cost. And oftentimes it is the women that suffered, because if you had 3 boys and 3 girls, it is the girls that will sit home and for the boys to go to school. And this is not a narrative that we must encourage. We must encourage a culture and a vision that brings everyone together. The communal spirit that ensures that in my village, everyone will bring something little to contribute for that or for our young boy to go to school. And the communal spirit that every tax, every citizen contributes, one contributing 1 cedi, another contributing 2 cedis, another contributing 10,000 cedis a month, equitably according to their earning, according to their income and standing, just to put it together for us to be able to ensure that the child that is also like in Team Fojo gets the opportunity for education, and that no child is left behind. The pursuit of SDG, and in particular SDG Goal 4.2, providing inclusive, equitable, quality education for all and promoting lifelong learning opportunities, and ensuring that none is left behind, must not just be a rhetoric, it must not just be a cliche, it must be a pursuit that we are pursuing with understanding and deep conviction. So when you put together before the coming into being of free SHS, every year data has it that not less than 100,000 young ones had their dreams of education curtailed at JHS. Every year. And so for the past 6 years, if not for SHS, free SHS, we would have had no less than 600,000 out of the nearly 2.2 million who would have benefited by the time we are done with this year's placements. Sitting at home with no bright future, with no opportunity to meaningfully contribute to social economic development the way they had intended to. And that had been no choice of theirs, had been no fault of theirs, simply because they were born into a home that could not afford. But not born into a country that could not afford. The country could afford it. And so the vision of His Excellency, President Nana Addo Akufo-Addo, even way before 2017, the dream to grant every Ghanaian child opportunity for secondary education and TVET education at the second cycle level is a game-changing vision. It is not a partisan vision, and I always say that the gains in free SHS and this strategic investment that the country together we are making in the future of our children, it is not to any political party's credit and must not be viewed as such. It is a credit to all of us. Free SHS has by this far become successful and implemented successfully because of everybody's contribution. Heads of assisted secondary schools, teachers, parents, stakeholders, non-teaching staff, everyone has contributed to the fact that we see it today. So it is a national success story. Free SHS policy is monumental. It is game-changing. It is the best gift that we could give to posterity. And I commend highly the President that even when globally every country is in difficult times, with Ghana not an exception, and when we needed to take austere measures to be able to keep within the times, education remained a priority. And I want us to view it as such together. Well, you talk of Norway and many other countries. The time they needed to take some tough decisions to prioritize education, they were in tougher times. But that investment is paying dividends that have become attractive for all to follow. For the past few months, getting to a year, that I've been at post serving as Deputy Minister for Education, month in, month out, many senior officials and ministers of education from our neighboring countries and other African countries visit the ministry to share ideas with us, to benchmark best practice with us, to ask us how we started, how we did it, how we implemented free SHS. They want to do the same. And when you're done sharing with them the success and you tell them these successes did not come without challenges, and they begin to mention some of the challenges that we had and how we overcame it, they tell to themselves, we can't do this in our country because the people will not support us to surmount this challenge if it comes up. You have a blessed people, a people that together came to overcome some of these challenges. There was a conference I attended, and globally many countries were coming to read their enrollments. And many African countries that are peers reported some really shocking secondary enrollment ratios. And I said to myself, I shouldn't be too excited because our narrative would have been the same without the intervention of free SHS. Would have had a lot of our gifted and talented students, the brightest and the best, seated where they don't want to be because no one would push them forward. Just this morning, when I entered my office, the first woman that came up to my office was in tears. But it's a situation that I'm used to as a member of parliament, at least for 2 terms. You are used to that. But it's about her child. She needs support to be able to push her child through. There are many people today who even still need some push, even in addition to all that the government is already investing into. There are many people today, if they would be placed in the best of schools, if you don't buy chop box and transfer them, they can't go. They can't. Government is paying their feeding. Government is paying their core textbooks. Government is paying their special interventions, so extra classes would not have to be paid by them. Government is paying for their PE kits. Government is paying for everything, their utility. And even those that are in day school, paying for their hot meal at least once a day. But still needed a few things. But it's not only my village. Many of you still identify with what I'm saying. So the situation we have in the country is that critical. And that is where the question that Professor Samuel Kokubonsu threw at all of us excited me the most. Okay, if we're saying that we're going to segregate who qualifies for free SHS based on income or based on who is poor, who is rich, how are we going to determine? We really need a very scientific basis, very strong empirical basis to be able to determine that. And I look forward to that day when we'll be able to do so. But until then, if the child of the man whose monthly salary sees deduction in tax and put into the national basket to fund free SHS will have to be exempted from free SHS because their father is rich enough to pay their tax, it's still part of the conversation that we must have as we seek to talk more about the current state and the future of free SHS. And so the one that you would meet, because their face is as poor as in Tim Fojo's face, looking, maybe just like, maybe as well as you are, or maybe better. So if you're saying that certain traits and certain, classification of people are, just arbitrarily are considered poor and must benefit, it's difficult to determine. So it is together. The child of the rich, the child of the poor, all must benefit. The one whose parents may not be able to contribute much still deserves a chance. Now, I just want to throw a question, and I know many of us may identify the times when there was no free SHS, and you went through O levels and A levels and WASI, and there was this COCO scholarship. If we took, a survey in this room, how many got COCO scholarship and how many did not, it would turn out that 80% of those who actually got it were those who didn't need it. And 80% of those who did not get it were those who needed it. Because we applied severally for COCO scholarship. And I couldn't get it. And there were other friends of mine. They had been in urban cities. They had never been seen cocoa tree before. But I go to the farm every day with my parents. Nursing and weeding and do everything cocoa, and never got the chance to benefit. So as we embark on this conversation of consolidating the gains of free SHS and the well-intentions to prefer some reviews, let us bear in mind all these historical antecedents and things that have happened before, so that in our efforts of contributing to strengthening free SHS, we may not inadvertently contribute to bringing us back to where many were cut off from access. The very barrier of costs that we sought to remove for the whole country, that everyone gets access, may be coming back. And that is why all the suggestions are accepted. We take them in good faith, we listen to them, and they are receiving attention. But we also ask that we continuously think on these things. Free SHS. There's a story of a young lady from a certain village who got an aggregate that was in the 40s. But because of the 30% equity access that free SHS came with, the child from the public school, even from the poor place, even from the hard-to-reach areas, the places where many teachers may not desire to go to, like my village, and so we made do with a few, and so our grades averagely may not be as good as our compatriots in the privileged communities. She had access to a brick girls. And when her story is told, it was told that even when she was given the placement under the 30% equity into that category A school, a very desirable school that is highly subscribed, and everybody wants to send their kids there, there was some reluctance even to enroll them, because that was not the kind of material that a category A school must pay. But this child was accepted nonetheless. This young lady, 3 years on, after they completed and they went back for their speech and prize-giving day, the child from the village, the child of the poor, the child who could only access secondary education perhaps because President akufo-addo instituted this, and the people of Ghana accepted and supported, the child who, even if their parents could contribute or family could contribute to send them to school, may not by their grade have had access to a brick girls. I'm not even sure Ase Manso may have admitted her with that free SHS. My own Ase Manso. She swept 7 out of the 8 prizes. 7 out of the 8 prizes. And so there are many such people that we must not deny them the opportunity to get to school. The child of the poor also deserves the right to be in an elite school. It is not only the elite that must continue to be elite, to widen the inequality gap, to further exacerbate the socio-economic situation. So in long term and strategically, all these are factors and the pillars upon which free SHS stands, removing barriers, removing cost as barrier, and granting access, and also ensuring that there's equity. There's also the pillar of relevance, ensuring that in our 21st century today, we have the kind of programs and pathways that are going to ensure that the child that is educated in Ghana becomes as equally competitive as the child that receives the education in any part of the world. Because today, I always say that the challenges that face us are global in nature. COVID-19 was global. Climate change is global. The economic situation is global. So these 3 biggest situations that are staring us in the face are all global in nature. And so, if you are preparing a people that are going to address these challenges, you need to have them globally competitive. But in the same vein, the opportunities, the many enormous opportunities of innovation and many opportunities that exist to make it are also global in nature. So the one that has received their training and education in Ghana can compete, sit here and compete with any other potential staff in any part of the world for a job. And so we bear in mind the relevance, training our people to have the relevant skills. Education Commission, which is one of the biggest education organizations based in the United Kingdom with Sir Gordon Brown as the chair, in 2020 commissioned a report. And in that report, they indicated that if nothing changes by the year 2030, 825 million young people will reach adulthood without the skills needed to thrive in today's world. And that is nearly half the global youth population. Not only a Ghanaian situation, it is a global situation. So our human capital index of the current 0.44 has come from a negative before, in 2013. And together we've been trying to shore it up, to be able to get to that of the Japans and that of the South Koreas and the Finlands and the United States and Canadas. The higher the human capital index, the bigger the opportunity to quickly transform. And like I indicated at the outset, even the countries that are advanced are moving forward. And so if we want to catch up, we must leapfrog. And so relevance had become one of the very important pillars that free SHS had come on. whilst we're at it, I must indicate that the government's commitment in ensuring that infrastructure expansion is done commensurate with the growing enrollment of students in our SHS was an investment that is paying dividends. Of course, we couldn't have waited until we had every school having the number of capacities, the number of classrooms, and the number of dormitories, and the number of libraries and science labs to the capacities that these new numbers could accommodate before rolling on free SHS. I've had many people contend that, why don't you wait? If you know that the average enrollment before free SHS was 800,000 enrollments, before free SHS. The average enrollment in our senior high schools and TVET schools were 800,000. And then when free SHS came in, it jumped to 1.2 million. So that 400,000 people that would have stayed at home and would have been cut off, who were given access by free SHS, would put pressure on the limited facilities that is there. So why don't you wait and suspend free SHS until such a time when you have built all the infrastructure? But we needed to be very innovative. And that is why a year after the implementation of free SHS, the all-year-round concept was introduced, such that you have the same facilities that is catering to 1.2, that was catering to 800,000 students, catering to 1.2 million students, optimally. And whilst at it, very aggressive investment was put into infrastructural expansion, classrooms, dormitories, many infrastructure, dining halls and assembly halls. As a matter of fact, between 2017 and 2020, a total of 1,132 such infrastructure, 1,132 such infrastructure were initiated in all our public SHS and TVET institutions. And within the same period, 724 of them were completed and commissioned. As we speak, every day you get a call from one school or the other that one of the buildings is finished and come and commission it. Just this Thursday, I'm traveling to St. Mary's in Oti region to commission some of the projects that have been completed, and some also that were done by the Old Students Association. So the government did not relent in their efforts that granting access to the numbers, we need to embark on a commensurate expansion in infrastructure. And we are still at it. Another that was also very critical, which Prof has graciously touched on, has been the pillar of quality. There are many that contended that if we are pushing through numbers, 1.2 million instead of 800,000, if you don't deny 400,000 opportunity at SHS, then you can't have quality. You're only pushing through numbers and quality. There are many that predicted that quality was going to be compromised. And whenever such had contended that we drop the 400,000 people and just stick to the 800,000 enrollment, I ask myself, whose child, whose nephew, whose niece must be dropped? And whose words must be accepted? But empirically speaking, quality has improved very significantly at the introduction of free SHS. And as all educationists here will identify, there are some specific outcomes and indicators that you use to measure quality. And one of such cardinal indicates strongly, and I have the facts here, between 2015 and 2021, even by 2020, when the results of the first batch of free SHS came out, we saw over 50% of our students that sat for WASI passing not less than 50%, passing A1 to C6 score. The number of students that had A1 to C6, that's quality passes in core subjects, was not less than 50%. And it was a feat that had never happened before. The only time that we had even at least two subjects passing crossing the 50% line was in 2018, with integrated science recording 50.48% and social studies recording 73.25%. In 2019, when we nearly crossed the line, English language was left behind. But in 2020, English language pass rate, A1 to C6 score, 57.34%. Integrated science, 52.53%. Mathematics, 65.71%. Social studies, 64.31%. Now, in 2015, integrated science had improved from 28.7% pass rate. 28.7% pass rate. This was a time there was no free SHS. Fast forward in 2020, the 28.7% pass rate had improved to 52.53%. Mathematics. In 2015, when there was no free SHS, that many thought that the quality will be high, and when the numbers are increased, quality will be compromised. Mathematics had recorded 32.4% pass rate. But the situation improved to 65.71% pass rate in 2020. So all the indications are there. Now, when this record came, and when we saw that out of the candidates that sat WASI in all the West African countries, Gambia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, all the countries that make up WAEC, did analysis and concluded that some 83% of all the candidates that sat WASI from all these 7 countries who scored A1 in all the 8 subjects, 83% of them come from Ghana alone. The Ghanaian candidates alone, 83%. It is the success and the quality outcomes we're seeing in free SHS. It is not to any political party's credit, and I must emphasize that. It is a national success story. We must all be proud that our students are making us proud and raising high the flag of Ghana. It does not matter which political regime, we are seeing this success. And so we must sustain it, and we must sustain the gains. So when this sterling and historic results was seen in 2020, a lot of people said, oh, this is going to be a 9-day wonder. I mean, it's not sustainable. Whatever must have accounted for this, they can't sustain it. So let's see. But thank God that in 2021, we had an incremental improvement from the performance of 2020, and there was, across the board, a cumulative improvement in our outcomes. So we must not relent on ensuring that the next results become better than the previous. We must not relent on making sure that a child that sits WASI in Ghana becomes competitive. It doesn't matter whether their parents are MPP or NDC, CPP, or any party that's yet to be formed, but they are Ghanaian children. And we must be proud that we are doing something together great. Something must have been accounted for this quality. And it is not one that just one person or GES or let's say Ministry of Education or just the government alone can take credit for. Of course, the teachers did their part. The heads of schools did their part. The teacher unions did their part. Parents, all stakeholders did their part together. We came together and we ensured that the policy succeeded. And that's how come we saw this outcome. If you're going to invest and just as came with free SHS, paying interventions monies to teachers such that every child, the child of the poor, the child of the rich, will receive equal number of extra classes, same time, before normal classes begin. To cancel the old narrative, well, only the rich would have access to extra classes and the poor would not have extra support for tuition. So if you're paying teachers interventions money to go the extra mile for every child, you're sure to have improvement. If you're paying for core textbooks for every student to make sure that they have access to all core textbooks to study and to make available elective subjects in their libraries, in their bookshops, and make it available for them to go and make reference to when you make this investment. Certainly it must reflect in quality. When you are recruiting more teachers across the schools and ensuring that core subject teachers are given special training and periodic training, certainly it must translate into an improved outcome. When you're feeding the child that will come to school hungry and will go back on empty stomach, now he's fed. Now he doesn't think about how his next meal, where his next meal is going to come from. He will have the sound mind to study. Definitely it will account for something. When you're making sure that there's opportunity for them, even after they have covered the syllabus, even to have access to the trend of past questions and chief examiner's report, interrogating the weaknesses in how many people had answered certain questions, even for them to build that confidence, which was a privilege of the few rich people whose parents would go to WAEC and buy at very exorbitant costs for them, leaving the child of the poor. Some across the board, certainly quality must improve. And so the gains we have made in our education thus far is a collective one. The successes we have chalked in education thus far, and I'm bringing my thoughts to an end, is collective. And the question is, has free SHS been successful? Yes, it has. But the next question is, has it come without challenges? No, they came with challenges. How did we overcome them? Together. How did we do it? We listened. And so for it to continue succeeding, we must keep listening. And so the government has that position, and the Ministry of Education, we have the position of listening to every idea. We will not discount any idea that comes from any stakeholder, because it is in listening to these that we can continually make this better. Free SHS at the outset in 2017 was not in the shape and form as it is today. Many formative reviews had been occasioned, and most of them through stakeholder consultations like this. And then we'll listen, okay, so if you could do this and if you could do that, if you look at here and if you could look at that, perhaps. So when we started, for instance, we're only doing 20% perishables to the schools. It got to a point, no, we had to do it 30. And so when we started, there were many things that were not like this today, but periodically there had been reviews. When we started, there were no utility bills were not directly being paid by the ministry. The schools, many of the schools will have to pre-finance it. And later bring it was imposing burden, and we listened and we took steps. Time will not permit me to go through all the formative reviews and the many reviews. But one significant such review was that when we started, there was nothing like all year round school. It was not like double track. But we listened and we ensured that we reviewed. And so if contrary to the perception of some that free SHS is resisting review or not being reviewed, in itself at the beginning we have had many formative reviews, and we'll continue to listen so that we'll make it better. With my background as economic policy analyst, we know that every policy in any part of the world, the most successful, even still have challenges. And it's because of anticipation of those challenges and to keep the parameters in check and to keep the outcomes in desirable levels, you need to build in itself reviews periodically. So we will continue to listen and we'll continue to make free SHS policy better for all of us. When we started, we had only 47 TVET institutions that were part. Today, additional 139 TVET institutions have all been roped on board, leaving none behind. So we will continue to listen, and we'll continue to make free SHS policy better, and to ensure that it becomes a legacy that posterity will continue to cherish. So let us keep the conversation, and let us keep engaging. But all these are strategies that are ensuring that the Ghanaian child, regardless of who gave birth to them, has access to quality education and to be empowered to meaningfully contribute to socio-economic development. I thank you very much for your attention. God bless you.
another round of applause for our second speaker, the Deputy Education Minister. Thank you so much, Honorable Reverend Roger, for delivering that speech for us. We now understand, and we'll still be debating on this topic. All right. So, I think we are almost getting ready. Everybody's mind is going on the football. I hear it's Ghana and Nigeria. It's just like the Ghana Jollof and the Nigeria Jollof debate.